Zo, nee, niet zo. Not starting with so.
Zo.
Welcome to Food is Fact. Eten is weten.
Eten is weten.
Ja, van de mooie vertaling. A weekly food podcast where we dish out the sense and nonsense of the food world. Served up with fresh, piping hot facts brought to you by our guests. Today we have Hidde Boersma, me, myself, Joris Lohman, and a very special guest, also again broadcasting from the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences, just behind the European Parliament. And we are still at the Back to Growth conference, and we have here present Simon Meegling, who is an innovation manager at Bayer Crop Science, and a top voice on LinkedIn. I've been following him for a very long time, and you as well. I think you tipped.
Yeah,
me
definitely.
to,
I was a fan.
Yeah. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
And you're like one of the few friends who can actually speak English.
In France.
Yeah, in France.
The only two.
I'm sorry, I can go straight back to my French accent if you prefer. I have no problem to do the interview in French.
It makes us feel more comfortable.
Thank you.
So what does an innovation manager do?
Yeah, it's my role at Bayer Crop Science is to identify new technologies and build partnerships specifically for R&D and specifically for what we call small molecules. I think most people call it pesticides. So it's pesticides R&D, looking to build partnerships to help drive the pipeline, basically help the researchers make better decisions based on data. We do a lot of projects around that, and I can give you some examples later.
Yeah. And what is your background? How did you become innovation manager?
Yeah, I'm just a chemist. I often say I'm a scientist that talks too much, but my formal education is in chemistry, so organic chemistry. So that's the chemistry of carbon, nothing to do with organic farming.
Yeah.
It's the chemistry of carbon. I did a postdoc at Berlin University in organometallic chemistry. So basically carbon and metals together. Mm-hmm. So what did I do? I made new natural products and worked with making faster, better catalysts for certain chemical reactions.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, so you're not a communication scientist, also not at Bayer, but you communicate a lot to the outside world.
Yeah.
How did you get into...
Yeah, I got into it. I was working with some of my colleagues in Lyon, in France, so Philippe and Catherine. We were working together in our life hub, and I'll say a few words about that later. And basically, I got fed up. I got fed up of reading stuff on the internet that wasn't true.
Right.
I got fed up reading stuff on LinkedIn that wasn't fact or evidence based. And so I started talking about some interesting topics for me, some topics from my heart. And then I found that the simpler and the simpler I got, the more and more impact I had.
In terms of how you communicate.
Exactly, and so I vulgarized. Less and less scientific I wrote, the more and more interest I got from it. And so I went down this road of today. Now I'm conveying some very interesting, some very important and very basic science to the general public.
Yeah, because that's kind of what triggered me. I've been following you, I think, for a couple of years. And kind of the thing that we have, we started this podcast bringing the wizard and the prophet together, right? So you had this book of Charles Mann where you have like the worldview of we have to live in harmony with nature. That would be me a couple of years ago, and everything will be fixed by technological innovation.
And it's still me.
And it's still him, yeah. That's actually what happened. Then I kind of managed to fly. No, that's not so this kind of what we always try to do in this podcast. So the voices that I started to follow after I started talking to Hidde, one of the first was you, actually. And it's interesting what you say, like, I saw things online which were not true, so I'm trying to bring truth. The first impression that I had of you is really, on the wizardry side, so really debunking, let's say, romantic non-facts or like ideas, let's say, with science. But I mean, are you also aware of kind of the framing that is there? Because if you're saying this is a fact, there's always kind of a paradigm and kind of a cultural significance behind it. Are you aware of that, and how do you kind of navigate that field?
Yeah, my wife generally is how I navigate that field. So we talk a lot. We have two dogs, two small schnauzers, 8 kilos, 10 kilos. We walk them a lot. We have a lot of conversations.
Right.
And the fact which came to mind just now was really, we live twice as long as we did 100 or 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm walking the dogs with my wife 2 nights
This
ago.
is a fact.
This is a fact.
Yeah.
And I'm walking, this is a fact, we live twice as long as we did 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm just walking the dogs with my wife, and I tell her this. And of course, suddenly my wife has a reaction. So, and how do I stay fact-based? How do I build the evidence? How do I sort of test it? My wife, her father's a philosopher.
Right.
And so she comes from a very, very different world to me. I'm from a science-based education. And so we have these wonderful, wonderful long discussions around, well, how is it measured? How do we know? How did
That's
you take
what she
into
says.
account?
So you're saying this is a fact because here's the data.
Yep,
and then she
exactly.
says, how is this measured?
How is it measured? Did you take into account wars? Is this
Right.
global?
Yeah.
Is this specific regions? What are the reasoning behind it? And so the whole conversation, which was a wonderful conversation for 2 hours, around all of this information on the fact that we live longer today than we did before.
Yeah.
But there are always, I often see you also like posting things, for instance, about the evolution of corn from the small teosinte to a big corn. And this is definitely a fact, but like the decision to share this is also value-based, I think. There is this idea of modern agriculture has brought us so much, let's continue on the path of modern, and it is my
used
story,
as an
but
argument, so to say, to kind of promote the life science approach to the future of agriculture, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, as a society, we've forgotten some really, really basic things.
Right.
And one of them is we've forgotten that we have to farm. So we go to the supermarket to buy our tomatoes, or we think we can grow them in our back garden. And I can tell you, I've tried this in my 24 square meter garden. The first year, fantastic bumper crop. The day we left for holiday.
Exactly. Yeah.
Came back and of course, everything's on the floor. Next year, fantastic bumper crop because we didn't harvest anything. It all fell down. And so we've forgotten these basic things. And I mean, we're here today having this podcast because we're part of the 98% of people who don't farm. And the 2% that do, that put the food on my table and produce the wheat for my sandwich this morning and the eggs and the lettuce.
Yeah, yeah.
But the story about like the profit side and says, this is definitely true. We gained a lot, but isn't the balance too much balance to the modernization?
What's happening here?
Yeah.
What are you doing? You're taking on the
profit role. No, but this is also like inside my head the discussion. Like, is there? Might there be some truth in the fact that modernization has gone too far and maybe we should more focus on community sense and do small scale agriculture? Is there a truth in there?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, I think it's the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know that one.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Explain, please.
The second law of thermodynamics. So you cannot create or destroy matter. You can only transform it.
Right.
Okay, and this is really important. I think it's the second law.
Yeah, it is. I think. Yeah.
And this is really important when you come to this. Like, have we gone too much?
Yeah.
Has farming destroyed the world? And then this also raises a whole load of questions for me because one of the reasons that we live twice as long today is we've essentially reduced, I'd love to say eradicated, but it's not the case, but we've essentially reduced famine.
Yeah.
There is still pockets of famine.
Most part of the world. So.
Especially in the Western world.
Yeah.
Thanks to modern agriculture, being able to grow more calories from less land, we've been able to reduce famine and we have a stable, abundant food supply. And so the question, have we gone too far, really comes down as well, a philosophical question as well I'm sort of stopping myself because I know where I'm going with this. It comes down to philosophical question. Is every life equal? Is every human life equal? Does everyone deserve to have a plate of food in front of them 3 times a day?
Yeah, and then again, I think this is also, and it's nice because we're 4 minutes into the podcast and we've already kind of deciphered the entire discussion. But I think this is the big moral question between the wizard and the prophet, saying, and that's what I've learned from you. Kind of the prophet wants to have puts the ecosystem and the planet and the nature at first place, and the wizard says, well, I have this more human-centered approach, and we need to put the interest of people first.
Yeah.
And that's also, I think, the food sovereignty or the food security versus planetary health debate.
Yeah, but then there's always still why am I'm taking the stance of the prophet?
Yes,
but then
this is what I've always wanted.
No, but then there's always this luring idea of if we take humanity first, but we destroy the environment, eventually the humanity will also be destroyed.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to agree with that completely.
no.
I mean, I'm going to put through a hypothetical situation through a number of assumptions, and then we can discuss whether you agree or disagree with me. And I'm not saying this is correct, what I'm about to say, just saying this is a series of hypothetical discussions. Assuming that humans are the only intelligent life form in the universe, does it not become our obligation to explore other planets in order to propagate intelligent life throughout the rest of the universe?
That's a difficult question.
Exactly.
For me.
So we all want biodiversity, but let's assume that there's no other life forms on any other planet.
Yeah.
Does it not become our obligation to inhabit these planets and to bring life forms there in order to support
More
biodiversity and more life? Again, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just asking a hypothetical question to sort of look down this prophet and wizard microscope. You know, the planet has limited resources.
Yeah,
but
that's what you
they can't be
agree with.
destroyed. Remember the second law of
It can't be destroyed.
can't be destroyed, can't be created, but we can transform them into something of more use, and that's what we do a lot. And I'm not an expert in nuclear power, but that's what we do a lot with nuclear power: is turning something, a rock, into abundant electricity.
Yeah.
So for you, it's clear that the path to sustainability is more modernization of agriculture, I would say.
For me, it's absolutely clear the reason we're here today is because of technology.
Yeah.
And being a chemist, when people tell me they don't want to use synthetic chemicals, and this is a bad word, synthetic chemicals, and I often ask them, did you write that on your iPhone?
Yeah.
How was your iPhone made? Because it's not natural.
Yeah, but still, again, you are, like Bayer is also working on the transformation of from chemical pesticides, let's say, like synthetic pesticides to more natural. That's a good thing, I would say, and it's been pushed by. It's generally not always, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'm pausing you there because just because something's natural doesn't mean it's good.
No.
So I prefer to look at the profile of each chemical on its own, the toxicological profile specifically, because that's what we care about, is health, on its own, and not say, biocontrol is better than synthetics, because it's not always the case, as you guys both already know. Some of the most toxic substances found on Earth are natural. Botulinum toxin is the one which comes to mind as one of the most acute toxic substances found on the Earth, which is also the same substance that people inject into their eyebrows and lips to make them look younger.
Those people are the same people who then complain about
those people are the same people.
pesticides.
And what's really important when I'm saying this is that we have to remember it's the dose that makes the poison of something. All matter is a chemical.
Yeah.
All chemicals are toxic. It's the dose that makes the poison.
Yeah. If you would be, because you're a very convinced person, you're bringing facts to the world. Again, kind of reflecting on this wizard and prophet thing. Do you agree with this framing that Charles Mann created? And would you say that then in the end, your perspective is kind of winning?
I don't think it's about winning or losing in terms of perspective. I think it's about sharing knowledge and evidence. I mean, I think as humans we spend too much time fighting each other.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be a great world if we could get along much better and not have this football team? I want to have I don't know, I'm taking an extreme stupid example, but I'm an organic. I want to have only organic food. It's the best. And I want GMOs or whatever it is. Wouldn't it be so much better if the worlds could come together and we could choose the best tools from the toolbox for the best technologies from the toolbox for the problems that we're trying to solve?
Yeah. And do you get a lot of negative responses to bringing the facts in the way that you do online?
Yes.
Yeah. From whom?
Members of the public, so some of my followers as well. I think each negative response is an opportunity to ask a question.
Yeah.
And I think every question asked is an opportunity to share some evidence and to share some information, not to change anybody's mind. Because a lot of these comments, they're based on beliefs, they're not based on evidence. But it's an opportunity to share a different point of view and maybe to an audience that you haven't spoken to before. Yeah.
So you do think that bringing this information and keeping the conversation will in the end elevate the discussion.
I mean, that's the hope.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Great. Well, that's for an introduction.
Quite the introduction, almost a fact already also, but
it's nice to have. But we're going into our format, which means that I'm asking my friend here, Hede Boersma, to explain to us, to bring to us his first fact.
My fact of this week is vegetable production in Europe has decreased by 7% in the last 5 years. And this is, to me, I take this fact, of course, because this worries me. Some agricultural production might not be a bad idea to make it decrease, maybe. But vegetables are healthy, and also like in a context of geopolitical spanningen. Tensions.
Mm-hmm.
This might be problematic, but I was also surprised that I know that we're in a transition to maybe more organic Green Deal, but that already the decrease was so poignant. I didn't know, and like I thought it was. I was reading through the European statistics report, as I do often,
As one does.
as one does.
Just before bed.
Exactly, and
He actually does, I think.
and I thought like 7%. It's a lot. It's like, especially if with a growing population, it's definitely a lot. It's still doable. But if you look at the details, there were some crops who were still growing. But for instance, cabbage. The last 5-year cabbage has decreased by almost 20%, 17 to be precise. And it was also carrots also declined by 15%. And there was, like, as statisticians do, there wasn't really an explanation on why this was actually true, but it was a combination. Probably they thought of the weather, so climate change, but also more strict regulations, both on manure, both on pesticides, and
Farm employment.
and especially also definitely was a labor problem. So the thing is with vegetables, they're still quite labor intensive. So if you compare it, for instance, to wheat, for instance, I know in the north of the Netherlands, in North Holland, they need a lot of people to harvest, like cauliflower or broccoli. It's still all done by hand. It fascinates me. So it's for me this was quite worrying.
I mean, I think there's two parts to the story for me that are important. One is I think it's bad that the production is declining. I think it's bad, except for Brussels sprouts.
I like them.
Because you don't like them.
Yeah, I don't like them. Not even bacon.
Not even
can
a new
make-
one, no.
Not even bacon can make Brussels sprouts taste
I'll
good.
make you Brussels sprouts one day, and I'm sure you'll love them.
But the issue here, when it comes to food sovereignty, when it comes to vegetable production, fruit and vegetables are healthy.
Yeah.
Eating fresh fruit. If you want to make America healthy again, it's really simple.
Yeah, exactly.
Eat
more
more
vegetables.
fresh fruits
Eat
and
your
vegetables.
veggies, yeah.
It's as simple as that. And it's really important for society to have access to cheap and abundant fresh fruits and vegetables. And having a declining production in Europe, for me, is an alarm bell. It's a warning signal saying something bad is happening. That production is perhaps being exported, so it's going to smaller, lower cost countries where there's lower labor costs. And of course, of the crop protection products that are being removed from the market based on ideology, not based on evidence. And we have the situation in France where beetroot production has really declined. And the beetroot cooperatives now are in major problems. And what's happening? We're importing sugarcane from other countries because sugar from beetroot is one of the 5 staples in my croissant and coffee. So it's
From
told
beetroot,
it's told you should eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day. So
And sugar beet is one.
sugar beets is one of them. Wheat is a
My daughter
vegetable.
likes that,
It's not a
actually.
meat. Butter. So I'll come back to butter. If you have a pain au chocolat, chocolate is a fruit.
Sure.
Coffee's a fruit. There we go.
I'm not
And
going
then-
to tell this to my 5-year-old daughter because that's her favorite dish, pain au chocolat.
Yeah, but the thing is, like you said, one of the things is labor cost, but also like the tiny margins you have, like for a farmer. And then vegetables are one of the most difficult to really have enough income on. So a lot of farmers actually change to products which are not that good for the soil, like for its sugar beets and potatoes and stuff, and onions. Of course, they're healthy, but you need to rotate those, and it's getting harder and harder.
Yeah.
And that especially the most healthy things, that those things becomes harder. We should like think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, as a European Union, this is problematic. And I don't really have, like you said, it's definitely regulation, but it's also labor, and it's really hard to change labor laws or make labor cheaper, because that's also something we don't want. So it's a difficult to tackle problem.
Yeah.
I do have to think when I see this fact, because there is, if you have the sustainability discussion also mainly in the Netherlands that I follow, there appears to also this discussion between the ones that want to produce a lot and the ones that like extensivation because they assume that this is more sustainable. Again, wizard and profit roughly along the lines. I still feel that this fact that this production is already going down might appeal to some parties
so.
in this case. How do you look at that discussion?
Yeah, I try and keep out of politics. and
Are you just bringing facts?
yeah, I try. But yeah, I could imagine that there are some political groups that would appreciate that and maybe even celebrate that there's less production there. That's
but
not
what would you say
something-
to these kind of hypothetical people?
That's a really good question.
That's a political question.
No, it's a really good question. I mean, I'd like to confront them with the reality is well, that's great. You go to the supermarket and you buy your food, and it's easy today. But what happens when that's not easy?
Yeah.
And what happens when that becomes more expensive? And what happens when it's you that starts having financial problems, buying staples each day, each week for you and your family?
Yeah.
And what happens if it's your children that suffer because of a lack of healthy and abundant fresh fruits and vegetables?
Yeah, yeah.
But I was also a little bit surprised that, like, if you have the transition to more organic and more regenerative, I have the feeling that if you start an organic or regenerative farm, you often start with vegetables. So I would like there are more regenerative farms who do vegetables than do wheat, because it's easier to be regenerative, and it's also healthier, and it's also like often these are more embedded into the societies, and so. But still, there's no at the moment there's no compensation.
Yeah, and it's a higher value crop.
It is absolutely true
compared to row crops, and you have to accept, if you want to go organic farming, you lose between 20 to 40% of your yield. Less yield means you need to convert more land into agricultural land, and so I have to question this balance on sustainability.
Yeah.
Is having more organic farms more sustainable? There's a question mark.
Yeah.
I don't think it is, because you need to convert more land, and you have more yield per acre is more land for nature.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is in the organic movement, that's, I won't say lately, but I've lately seen a couple of, let's say, publications and also long-term research that are actually also focusing on actually the counter-argument here, saying organic agriculture is not less, does not produce less food. They're actually really trying to prove the point again that the yield also sometimes measured slightly different, but the yield gap is not as big as, wizards like you and Hidde will obviously. How do you respond to that? Do you see this
I haven't seen that data. I've
right.
seen enormous amounts of data on this 20 to 40% yield gap, depending on the
20
crop.
to 40%. That was something.
Wheat in France is even higher.
Yeah.
It's 40 to 60.
40 to 60 for wheat in France, but I've seen tremendous amounts of data nailing that in, depending on the climatic situations, the geography, depending on the crop.
Yeah.
But that's really what it seems to be, is this 20 to 40%. Some crops can be much, much higher. And so,
So you would say, I mean, there's data on both sides, but you said that argument, I would be still, I mean, organic and let's say agriculture where you put yourself restrictions, are less productive.
Yeah, and then there's this myth as well that organic doesn't use pesticides. I mean, this is one of the biggest myths that's around there. Copper sulfate is the most used pesticide in organic farming. So copper sulfate, in France it's called bouillie bordelaise. I guess you have something
similar.
similar.
A lot nicer in French.
It's a biocide. It's an antifungal, so it's used to treat downy mildew, specifically in grapes, so for wine production, and in fruits and vegetables. And this comes back, it's found in nature. It's synthesized in 400,000 tons per year, mainly for organic farming in China. It's synthesized by taking copper and taking sulfuric acid and heating them together at 200 degrees Celsius until you form wonderful blue crystalline copper salts.
Sounds less appealing.
And when I say, it's found in nature, but it doesn't mean it's not nocive. It has a terrible toxicological profile in terms of spectrum. So it's a biocide, it kills bacteria, it kills fungi. And you can see in different countries, you can see where it's been applied at high doses per hectare. So I think it's now 4 kilogram per hectare. When I compare that to modern fungicides that you can apply 10, 15, 20, 50 grams per hectare, well, immediately, the dose does the poison, remember? Immediately you can see benefits. So biggest myth, organic uses pesticide. I'm sorry for your listeners.
No.
They
No,
found this out
and
from me.
But the
for me,
interesting
that
thing is, it keeps on coming back, right? Because, and I also I wrote a book, and I'm talking about all these kind of things, and this is one of the I'm less like straightforward as you are, but I'm bringing the same content there. And the interesting is, like yesterday was a big article in the Correspondent again, which is a left-leaning platform, and then it was about kind of the future of agriculture is in the hands of the innovative farmers, and they give large-scale and small-scale farmers really nice. But then multiple times there was, well, this is a good farmer because he does this and this and this, and he doesn't use pesticides. And I'm like, how do we kind of get this this discussion on a higher level, or like on a more adult level? Everyone's like, oh, no pesticides, that's good, and it's just missing the point completely, I think.
Yeah, and farming without pesticides doesn't exist.
No.
I mean, to be honest with you, Sri Lanka tried this.
Yeah.
Back in 2021,
It wasn't a success.
it wasn't very successful, and it doesn't exist. I mean, and we have to remember as well, why the pesticides exist to not just to support the yield. They're there to help us grow healthy crops. We have to remember that
this is also, like, you can elaborate on this, but this is of course people now say this leads to less healthy because there are residues on it. But you're saying it actually leads to, I know it leads to less waste, but it also leads to more healthy.
Yeah, exactly. So
How does this work?
Yeah, how does this work? So I'm going to go a little bit technical with you right
let's
now.
go.
Some of the most dangerous
We'll
substances.
edit it out if it doesn't. Know.
Yeah. So I mentioned botulinum toxin as a very, very dangerous natural substance. There's also a whole group of toxins called mycotoxins. Specifically, one of them is aflatoxin. And we can find these in corn, in wheat, and contaminated food is highly dangerous. And by using crop protection products, we can reduce the risk for society for these highly, highly toxic natural substances that could be found in our food supply. Yeah. And when it comes to residues, and this is a subject I'm particularly passionate about,
Residues.
is really important. And we live in a society where we've been taught by the media to fear an imperceptibly small quantity of a known, researched, regulated and controlled substance. And can I say the G word?
Yeah, definitely. I love the G word.
So let's take specifically glyphosate as an example. So we've been taught to fear
The G word.
0.01 ppm. So 0.01 ppm is 1 milligram per kilogram. I have a bottle to describe this with one red dot in it and a million other blue dots. We've been told to fear this, but we're not being told to fear 13% of a known carcinogen
Alcohol.
in our bottle of wine. And so because this is researched, it's regulated, it's controlled, tests are done. I mean, who wants to read the headline, 98% of our food supply is safe, it was tested, and the residues are below the MRLs that are set by the government, you have nothing to worry about. Nobody wants to read that.
But there's always like a little bit of the balance between there is a use for those activists to make. There's a push. They push farmers or like innovators to work harder. So for me, there's always. I think they're also, for instance, with Extinction Rebellion, they're often wrong, but they're also useful. There's always, for me, there's this little.
I think it's great to be challenged.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's fantastic. And I think we've shown, so the industry as a whole has shown through time that we can only do things better.
Yeah. Exactly,
Yeah. Coming back to the G word, because this is a nice. We had 3 episodes on this, also with a Dutch television show, actually, and the goal of their show was to prove actually that the way that glyphosate was accepted on the Dutch market or the European market, that's the Dutch market, that the way that they tested it was wrong. So it should be taken off the market, or that's kind of the. And we had a 3-hour conversation with them, and we didn't really come to. Well, I mean, this is one of the arguments that you just bring that was brought on by Hide, I think, but we couldn't find agreement on that part. How do you explain this ongoing discussion and activist? Well, this is journalism, but this large group of people that feel that there's something off, and we really need to research it better. How do you explain that?
I mean, glyphosate has become a totem. It's become this mythical creature that lives in the Monsanto caves somewhere.
The M word.
Yeah, somewhere. Sorry, can I say the M word?
You just did.
Somewhere in a labyrinth underneath the island of Crete. I'm caricaturing caricaturing this a little because it's literally what it's become.
Yeah.
It's become this totem of anger, of pain, of anti-science. It's almost become what vaccines have become in North America to the Maha movement.
Yeah.
And it's become this thing, and it's been around for 50 years. One thing which nobody knows, can I give you a fact?
Yeah,
Please.
So, in Europe, pesticides get re-registered every 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
They have to go through a whole complete new registration process, taking into account all of the data that's been generated in the last 10 years. It's all looked at, analysed and decided, should we continue to use this product, or is there something better that's available that has an improved profile or other improved attributes? That's not the same for medications, so paracetamol, all these things. It's not done every 10 years. So glyphosate has been re-registered now, I think, 3 or 4 times by the European Union. Each time, all of the latest data is analysed again. Last time it was re-registered for 5 years. This time it's been done now for 10 years, because basically you're looking at the data and you have, and in terms of chemistry, you have the best profile molecule. In order to have, in order for some chemistry to have a negative impact on you, you have to be exposed to it. And do you guys know how glyphosate is used in Europe?
Yeah. Only before to clean, as we say, to
so
clean
residues on something.
It's not there. It's impossible because it kills off your.
Exactly. It's used to burn down your weeds over the winter period.
Which is, I mean, in the public eye, we have this discussion every.
When you do it for grass,
spring,
then you see the whole field so yellow.
Which I do, and I do think that then like farmers don't have the right answer to this, or they could kind of explain it about, because it does look a bit weird, right?
Yeah, it may or may not look weird, but it's an essential part in order to avoid tilling.
Yeah.
Exactly, the biggest destroyer of biodiversity
tilling, definitely.
is tilling.
And it brings a lot of CO2 in the air too.
Macro and microfauna, and it breaks a lot of CO2. So you have a chemistry which is not sprayed on crops in Europe. It has the best profile of toxicology, highly water soluble, very, very easy excretion, very easy metabolism. So absorption, distribution, metabolism and excretion, 4 basic principles from science class. It has to get in, it goes through the kidneys and the liver, and it gets out. And what happens in between could be a toxic effect or not.
Yeah, exactly. This was my question. So like this one particle that's in your bottle or in your, like, where does it eventually end up?
Urine.
Urine, and then
it goes out. So this 0.01 ppm that you may or may not be exposed to will be excreted almost immediately in the urine because it's highly water soluble. And metabolized.
You mentioned something interesting also, like the comparison with the anti-vaccination movement. I wrote an article also in the Volkskrant about, I think that the whole fight against glyphosate also makes people distrust governmental organization, because they are there to make the world safe, to protect us. And if you fight so much which is called the CTGB, which is like the Dutch EFSA, if you fight so much, why would you not believe the CTGB but do believe the IPCC or whatever? It makes...
So it's a trust issue.
It's, for me, it's a trust issue. And what people don't see is that this trust issue, it corrodes trust in other institutions too.
Totally. And this is part of the playbook. Is to create distrust or mistrust in regulatory authorities, in science, in scientific expertise. It's happening in the USA today as we speak, and it's happening in Europe as well through the activism from certain NGOs and other organizations. And their goal is to create mistrust in science and corporations.
Yeah, but then again, they still want us to believe the science on climate change, and that makes it it's colliding.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but you're working for one of the biggest multinational, agrochemical companies in the world. So, why would I believe you? No. So just making this a nice conversation.
It's a great question, because you could say Simon works for Bayer, and so Simon only says what he's paid to say.
Yeah. Which actually was also the topic of this television show, that Hidde was investigated as being paid by Bayer or another organization. So he must, if being pro-industrial or being private, he must be paid for his opinion. Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I'm a citizen. I live in Lyon in France. I'm a citizen of Lyon. I'm a family man. I have a wife and 2 children. I don't have a secret door in the supermarket that I go into in order to buy my produce. I go to the same supermarket as everybody else around me. I've studied science for over 25 years. I've got 20 years of experience in the organisation. I've seen it, and I think everything about me is transparent, unlike Hidde. That's a joke.
Who gets better?
But you can find my profile online, you can see my work history. And so when anonymous people tell me you can't trust him, my immediate reaction is,
what about you?
I'm sorry, Karma's 290537 with 5 followers. Is that your opinion, or are you paid to say that? And creating distrust it's part of the approach taken by certain organisations is to attack scientists, to create distrust with scientists, because they want to push their own agenda. And
But there is this weird thing that there's the trust issues are bigger with big corporations.
Yeah.
So there are also some smaller scale seed companies, for instance, like Enza, who don't have this problem, and they have like their Winston.
Profits.
The profits are really big, but still they're small scale. They're family owned, and there's also this.
Even though, because the interesting thing is, I don't know how it was with that particular kind of television show, but to see the like you're communicating very openly about these kind of things. I've also tried to, in the past, get people from then Monsanto to participate in a debate, a very open debate, and they didn't want to, right? And it's often kind of difficult for journalists and for people to get to speak to people from the big bad organizations that you represent. What is there, because you do that like by yourself, or you would, what is there to win if Bayer would jump into the public eye and kind of have people take part in this conversation more often?
yeah, I mean, what is there to win for me is what you're asking. I mean, I speak as a citizen, I speak as a scientist.
Yeah, but you're not afraid that because you work at this organization that you often obviously get like attacked. I think for this, I mean,
what have I got to win is society. I mean, I suffer from arthritis, and I'm very, very grateful to have a drug that's made in a GM cell, which I inject every single week. I inherited this from my grandmother, who was called Simone, so I'm named after my grandmother. I'm very, very grateful for modern technology. Yeah. I'm also very grateful. My father is suffering from cancer, so stage 4 cancer of the prostate. Yeah. And I'm also very, very grateful for modern therapies that he's receiving in order to extend his life. Coming back to the fact that I gave you before, we're living longer than we were before, and it's not just because we're managing to avoid younger deaths under 5 years old. We're also extending life thanks to modern technology. Yeah. If we fear all of this new technology, all of these chemicals, all of these bad things, I mean, how can we live long and healthy lives?
Yeah. There is always this weird divide that there's, maybe because you put it in your mouth, but food is treated a lot different than medicines, and that's always fascinating, because even medicines you inject or you take in, and still there's a different discussion. I know, of course, the discussion is different because you put those GMOs or your pesticides in nature, but even if about health, there's this discrepancy between food and medicine.
And if I could summarize this discrepancy, if I could try to use one word, I think the word I've heard the most is choice. I choose to take a medicine. I don't choose to have a crop protection product sprayed on my food. Right. And I think that opens up other questions for me, because people are concerned again of this 0.01 milligram per kilogram of an MRL, a maximum residue level. And yet they forget that 99.9% of the pesticides that they ingest are actually from natural sources, because a plant can't move, it can't defend itself. Yeah. And so what does it do? Caffeine. It produces toxic compounds like caffeine, and nicotine is another one. Tannin, in order to protect itself from being eaten. Yeah, yeah.
Their profile are often definitely worse than glyphosate.
And exactly, and a lot of these substances aren't tested, regulated, controlled.
As much as, indeed,
Maybe back to my fact?
Exactly. No, not back to your fact, because we've been going on.
No, exactly. The last to finish it off was in that like, I want to say, like, the outlook for this year is even worse than 7%, because we're heading for a very hot summer, it seems. So this is worrying. That's what I want to conclude with that.
Because of all these different reasons. I'm going back to the format, and because we asked you to bring a fact as well. So let's jump to your fact.
Yep, so I mentioned mine at the beginning. I had a fact prepared that we live longer today. We live almost twice as long as we did 100, 150 years ago. Yeah. That was the fact that I brought. And why is this for me important? It's something that I think as a society we forget. Yeah. That technology is helping us live longer. Yeah. And if I look at the different inventions that have been made over time, what surprised me was that one of the most life-saving inventions wasn't actually in the medical domain. No. It was in It was in agriculture. It was in agriculture, part of the Green Revolution, so being able to use fertilizers, use irrigation, new genetics, crop protection products, saved over, it's estimated, 2 to 4 billion lives. Another things we forget as well, which are really important, that has also saved lives, is water sanitation. Chlorination of water, so keeping it free of bugs with a chemical. And of course, there's other ones. Vaccines have been incredibly important as well. But yeah, I feel as a society we forget some of the most basic things, and we have a tendency to this appeal to nature tendency to say everything that nature does is better. I don't think it necessarily is, but I think we can build on what nature's delivered us in order to deliver technology.
And is that also maybe something that we kind of forgot along the way? Because that's kind of the storyline that the opposing worldview would have, that we kind of fixated on the technology, and we forgot, the force of nature and like the things that nature can learn us, and to integrate it more.
I mean, if I go one step further, farming's not natural.
No.
There's nothing natural about living in a house.
Yeah.
If I wanted to have a natural life, I would live in a cave, drink rainwater, and only eat food that's died of natural causes.
Right. That would be,
I find it actually. You said like we forgot about those inventions, but I think it's even worse. Like I have the feeling that we're fighting the invention against them. We're fighting fertilizer, which is probably artificial fertilizer is the biggest one.
Yeah.
We're fighting against modern breeding, which is like Borlaug and stuff is the third one, and then you have the green revolution, so pesticides and stuff. Maybe like they're all in the top 5 of the most life-saving, and we're fighting them all, which is so fascinating.
As a scientist, is very difficult to understand sometimes.
Yeah. But the interesting thing, because this is also about storylines and how you bring it, right? Because this saying it saved lives, I think that might be also the core of the sustainability discussion, because you would also argue that without the invention of artificial fertilizer, we would not have this much people on Earth, right?
Yep.
And there is people say that are afraid of like crewing through the planetary boundaries, that we have created too many people as a result of this invention. How do you look to that? Like,
we come back to where we were almost at the beginning is, if again, a hypothetical situation, if we are the only intelligent life form in the universe, does it not become our obligation to leave planet Earth and explore other planets?
Yeah. But I do think that many people will not agree with that.
No, definitely
right?
not.
So they would be, and I think that's the interesting thing. If you're talking to like real prophets that are really convinced, then they would indeed kind of sometimes, actually, in a lot of the conversations behind doors, it would be, we just need less people on this planet. Yeah. And then you would have quite a moral discussion on that kind of who would decide.
Who decides? Isn't there a name for that? Isn't there a word to describe that?
Go for it.
I can't remember it.
No, okay. No, but exactly. But I think this is the core, and I think there is still convinced prophets that feel that like the natural world has kind of a higher moral entity. So in the end, we're just kind of destroying it, and we should just be with less people. I think this is it's not even kind of a hidden argument. It's often used.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps those people, they could set an example.
Yeah, that's all. You go first.
Yeah.
But
that would be your answer.
Would you say but even after behind the degrowth movement or something, there is this idea of like, it's not only there are too many people, but there's too many wealth. There's we see there's this sufficiency movement. It's like I can't handle that.
You both believe that there would be, with your inventivity, with kind of the resource that we have, we will be able to sustain ourselves with these amount of people on this planet, and even we will be able to create a more sustainable or less destroyed planet.
If we get things right, I mean, for me, the foundation of civilization is abundant source of electricity, of energy.
Right.
And that's something which we need to figure out as a baseline. And from that, everything else can grow.
Yeah.
You're here.
And you think that that will be possible with also if we would be phasing out fossil energy?
Yeah, I mean, I live in France, so I admit my bias immediately.
You are like the example.
So I mean, 70% of the electricity that we generate in France is low carbon electricity.
Yeah.
And often when I wake up and I look at my electricity maps in the winter and compare different countries, hydroelectric power, of course, and nuclear energy are two of the cleanest in terms of CO2 emissions, and also the safest forms of electricity. Yeah. If you look at the data on how many people die per kilowatt hour produced, then nuclear, solar and wind as well are also.
And it's fascinating that it's already this way. Like you've built those reactors already 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So even in a world of transitioning, there's not a single country who's come there. Like maybe Sweden.
Yeah, but we're waking up now. I think
Yeah.
the humanity is now waking
Yeah,
up,
it is, yeah.
especially with the invention of AI, because what does AI need? What do data centers need?
Energy,
Stable
yeah.
power supply,
Yeah.
which you can only achieve with nuclear, amongst other things, hydroelectric I mentioned, but you cannot do that
Yeah.
with wind and solar.
Yeah, yeah. And then maybe kind of wrapping up also this entire podcast, and I'm going to do some ask a very difficult question.
Yeah.
That's like one of the things that
The other questions weren't difficult beforehand.
Yeah, no, I mean you didn't. I didn't you didn't stutter for one moment. So no, I think we went quite deep, but it's to follow. The abundance of energy into our agricultural system, you said fertilizer, is one of the reasons that we manage to produce so much food and have so many people on this planet, right? But the production of nitrogen and fertilizers is mainly done by fossil energy. So you think that we can make the switch from that to nuclear or clean energy and put that energy in our food still?
I honestly don't know. I'm sorry to disappoint you on this one. I'm not an expert
Right.
on so I mean, the creation of fertilizer is an incredibly elegant reaction. Taking
nitrogen from the sky,
and turning it into a form that's available for plants.
Exactly.
And I honestly
I
don't know
think
the exact chemical process behind it.
Yeah.
I know that the problem there is that you don't need electricity,
Yeah.
you need heat.
Right.
And that's a lot harder with non-fossil fuels. And that makes it more difficult. It is possible with nuclear because you use a lot of steam. It's easier with nuclear than with solar and wind, but it's still more problematic. So heat, like you need to, often people say you need to electrify everything, and then maybe you find a solution for heat, but heat is here the problem. It's not electricity.
Yeah.
But what about looking at other ways to do the same thing? Could I create a bacteria that colonizes the roots of plants that can't do this process? Because some plants can, leguminous plants can, so vegetables, some vegetables can. But for non-leguminous plants, could I create a bacteria that does that process, that can capture the N2 and convert it into a form of nitrogen that's available for the plant in order to reduce or replace, so reduce first the amount of fertilizer I need to use in order to maintain the same yield?
Yeah. Is it still there? Already there? That's
it's a question mark. I mean,
right. Exactly.
in terms of an elegant procedure, it would be one that I definitely want to look into with synthetic biology and all of the data we have around genetics today.
Yeah.
They
But
did
that-
find some maize which had those bacteria. You find, this example. It's
Then again,
fascinating.
taking the profit
Sure.
perspective, this does, I mean, still feel like something that needs to be discovered. I mean, you have a lot of hope and trust actually in that we will be able to find these, but the solutions are not yet there. So that's kind of the way that you look at the future, where the profit would kind of feel that
It's
this
a
is
risk.
not there. So it's a big risk to kind of bet on that, right? Yeah, yeah. I want to finish this off.
Again, no effect from you.
No, but I think that's nice because I mean I'm more into the moderating, and I think that we could go on for another 45 or maybe 2.5 hours. Again, quite information dense. This podcast. I want to thank you very much for being here. And I would say it would be nice to do it again sometime because this was really this was a very good interview, I thought.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be following you online, and thank you for listening to this podcast. Hidde Boersma and Simon Meegling were here today.
And you're
Live
Loman.
from Brussels, and Joris Lohman.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you.
Doeg.